I think your pastor told me that he already announced this morning that I'm going to have a message about the end times, and I have to say this is a first for me. I never preach about the end times, and probably one of the reasons I never preach about the end times is because there is a very, very high chance that you get it wrong. Out of thousands of people who always preach about the end times, I don't think there is one person who got everything right. So the odds are against me. And of course, the one way to take care of that is not to be too specific or not to talk too much about the end, just on some issues and some small things. And whenever we try to interpret biblical prophecies, we are facing with a lot of difficulties. I'd just like to mention 3 difficulties that we have when it comes to biblical prophecies. Of course, there are more than 3. There are a lot of them. One is that we do not have a systematic presentation about the end times. We do not have a book. I wish we had a book that says, you know, this is how it's going to happen, first, second, third, and fourth. But we don't have that. Everything we have about the end time is collections of bits and pieces, and we try to put them together, and they do not always fit. And the only place in the Bible where we have probably the clearest language about the end time is when Jesus spoke about the end times. He did not use figurative language or symbols. He did not use poetic language. He spoke very clearly, directly about the end times. So even then, there are places or things which he said that they have different or various interpretations. Paul as well, and I would say all of the New Testament writers, except for the book of Revelation, it's pretty literal or direct in that sense. But the prophecies are compilations of portions which has a lot of times, like in the Old Testament prophets, has poetic language, has symbolic language, it has prophetic types. A prophetic type would be, for example, when one character in history did something which in some way reflects prophetically of another person in history. Like Jesus had many prototypes like this in the Old Testament, who, when we look at their lives, like Gideon and Joshua and Moses, Noah, Abraham, David, all of these, to some extent, they symbolized through their life certain aspects of Jesus. The problem with that is that no one ever understood these things and these types about Jesus until they were already fulfilled. It's easier for us to look on the fulfilled scriptures, and then we recognize that, oh, this was a prophecy about this. But before those scriptures are actually being fulfilled, you know, you don't have an idea or inclination of how those things are being fulfilled. Then you have prophecies, they have dual fulfillment, like they refers to a contextual, historical context, and they are being fulfilled historically, but they're also going to be fulfilled about those scriptures in the end time. But not every aspect it's going to be copied exactly the same, and there are only certain things that are going to be copied, and that makes it difficult. We have time separations. You can have a verse that prophesies, let's say, about the coming of Jesus, the first coming, like Isaiah chapter 9, verse 6. Very common verse. Everybody knows it, right? And the first verse talks about, you know, that a son has been given to us, you know, and it talks about the birth of Christ or the coming of Christ. But as you read in the second part, that's not being fulfilled until his second coming. So in the same verse, you have a huge separation. And then, of course, like I said, it uses historical context. Then the second problem we have is that the prophecies were not given to us to predict the future. Okay, now that's a little bit strange because a lot of time we think, so, well, that's what they are, so we can know what things to come. That's not true. The Bible or the biblical prophecy is not to be used as a crystal ball to predict exactly where everything was going to happen. This is why prophecies is presented in the scripture in such a way that you only understand them when they actually are being fulfilled, when they actually happened. Right at the end of the book of Daniel, Daniel wanted to understand those visions he had, and the angel told him, you know, these are not for you to know right now. These are for the people at the end time to understand. But before that, people will come and they will have all sort of interpretations, and those interpretations are continuously changing. And but as we come closer to the end, then we have, you know, the interpretation, they get closer and closer. To give you an illustration about this is, I would say the biblical prophecy is like a puzzle. Let's say you take a 500-piece puzzle, and you need two elements in order to fix that puzzle. You have the shapes of the pieces, and you have the picture. And you need both of them in order to fix that puzzle. Now, if you turn all those pieces face down, it will be almost impossible. Not impossible, but much, much, much harder for you to fix that puzzle. But when you have the picture and the shape, then, you know, you can put it together. Well, the shapes of these pieces are what we have. It's all these hundreds or thousands of biblical prophecies. But the picture is that end-time geopolitical situation, which if you don't live in those times, you do not understand how those pieces come together. Do I make sense? For example, 100 years ago, people could not understand the fulfillment of these biblical prophecies because the geopolitical look, it was not as it is right now, and is not how it was prophesied. Now, how many of you have been called to jury duty before? Okay? Now, when you go to jury duty and you wait in that waiting area before they call you into the room, one thing that you'll notice on every place in the jury duty, there are puzzles, right? And the first thing you note about those puzzles is that the frame of them are usually completed, but the middle is not completed. Why? Because the frame is the easiest thing to complete. You have one straight edge, that means it's right at the edge somewhere. If you have two straight edges, you only have 4 possibilities, one of the corners. By the way, I found out that I'm very, very good at fixing puzzles. Because once I bought a puzzle, and on the box it said 4 to 6 years, but it only took me 5 weeks to finish it. So what I'm saying on those puzzles, the easiest things to fix is the shape, the frame of the picture. And it's so with the prophecies. So we have some prophecies about the end times which we can't get wrong. We all understand, we all know about the kingdom of the Antichrist, and that's a general belief, and it is a true belief, but we don't have the details. So there are some prophecies in the Old Testament and the New Testament which they form this picture, the frame of it. But the pieces, we only start putting them together when the geopolitical situation comes to life. This is why I say, if you want to understand the world in which we live right now, the political situation right now in the Middle East, for example, you cannot understand it apart from biblical prophecies, and also you cannot understand the biblical prophecy without looking at the geopolitical situation. I was just mentioning to your pastor, last night I read this very interesting article online that right now there are some politicians, high-profile politicians, who are already now calling on some biblical experts like Joel Rosenberg. He was consulted by Rick Perry and by Rick Santorum and some of the Republican congressmen about the situation as it is right now in Syria as it relates to biblical prophecy, specifically to Isaiah chapter 17, where it prophesies that before actually there's Armageddon, the city of Damascus is going to be laid waste completely. That is a prophecy that hasn't been fulfilled. And the situation as it is right now, it points to the fact that this might actually be true. And of course, he wrote a book recently, which I didn't read it, but it's called Damascus Countdown. And I think in that one, he is talking about the fact that there's a nuclear threat to Israel, and Israel in preemptive strike, he nukes Damascus. I'm not sure if that's what's going to happen or how it's going to happen, but the Bible says Damascus is going to be completely destroyed. And I think that's clear, and it hasn't been fulfilled. And then the third problem with the biblical prophecies is our pre-understandings. Just to explain to you what our pre-understanding is when you already have an idea or understanding, whether it's right or wrong, it will not take a whole lot for someone to reaffirm what you already believe, right? I mean, if I say to you, Jesus is coming again, you'll say, yeah, you preach it to the choir. We all believe that. I wouldn't have to convince you of that. But if I was going to teach you something that's contrary to what you believe, it will sound weird and off, and there will be this resistance. So this is what happens also with biblical prophecies, because we have certain ideas that are formed into our mind, which sometimes a little bit hard for us to shake off. Let me give you two examples. How many of you believe that Antichrist is going to sign a 7-year peace treaty with Israel, and in the middle of this 7-year peace treaty, then he is going to invade Israel? Oh, wow, nobody. You don't believe that. Okay, but you heard that, right? And if I'm going to ask you about where you find this in the Bible, and most of you wouldn't even know where to look, but some of you might point to the Daniel chapter 9:27, but that's not exactly what that verse is saying. He's saying about the Antichrist that he's going to sign a covenant, or he's going to cut a covenant with many for 7 years. But it doesn't say with Israel. And my understanding of that is that that covenant that he's signing is going to be with this coalition that he's building. But because people keep saying that and keep been preaching that, no, he's going to have a 7-year peace treaty with Israel, then they develop this whole imagination, and they go from this, and then they imagine an Antichrist is going to come kind of like a political negotiator between Israel and the enemies, and is going to be accepted by everything like one who's solving the political situation. Israel is going to trust them. And from there, people go and say, maybe he's probably going to be a Jew, because the Jews going to believe him. And back in the 70s, people pointed to Henry Kissinger, say, he's the Antichrist. Now, Henry Kissinger was probably the best Secretary of State the United States had, at least in the last century. But because he was a Jew and he was so good at what he did, people said, well, he's the Antichrist. Because their view was this Antichrist will come who's going to be accepted by everybody, including by the Jews. But that's not what that verse is saying. And you have this one pre-understanding, and from that, now you develop this whole other picture that you're adding to this, and then things don't fit. Another example is people generally believe that when the Antichrist is going to come, he's going to be a global savior of an economic crisis. The whole world is going to be in this huge economic crisis, and he's going to solve this problem by implementing his cashless system. Again, where is this coming from? It all comes from Revelation 13, where it talks about this 666 on the hand and on the foreheads, and people develop then their whole idea of what that means. So we're looking for clues into technology, and then we say, wow, look, somebody put a chip under their skin. It's coming. And we develop this idea of what it's going to be like, but I don't think that's what Revelation 13 is talking about. I think it's a lot simpler than that. It actually talks, I think, about a number, 666, or about a name. Now, I wouldn't go into that tonight, but I'm just saying is how our pre-understandings sometimes takes us further than what the scriptures take us. Now, I like to say this, that throughout history, people always try to identify the Antichrist. And you have come up with, people come with all sort of ideas, and I never, fall into this trap, because, if you look right now on the internet and YouTube, you're going to find so much evidence that Obama is the Antichrist. You're going to find everybody who was a president was Antichrist. But none of these ideologies or things, even though they show you proofs, none of them are actually based on the Bible or biblical prophecy. If you believe that, come and see me. I have a few gold bricks that I'd like to sell you. You see, there are all these conspiracy theories and so on. But yet, we are now probably falling into this trap that now because of this, that we're not looking, or we are afraid to kind of identify what might be or could be the Antichrist, because we don't want to be associated with this, weirdos. And I never had an opinion about this, but tonight I actually do have an opinion. But my opinion is not based on some human imagination, but I'm going to give you 3 biblical reasons or scriptures, and one that it's coming also a 4th one, not from Bible, but it's coming from the Islamic expectation of what the Antichrist is going to be. Now, you already had a guest speaker over here, and I don't know if you had more than one. So I'm assuming that you're no longer into that category of believers who still believe in the Antichrist is this 10-nation European nation from the former Roman Empire. And I think we all understand right now that the Antichrist is going to form a coalition of 10 Islamic countries that's going to invade Israel. This is right now generally believed among all pastors and scholars. Very few, only those who probably didn't do any recent research, are still holding to the traditional view. So I'm not going to try to go into this, but I'm going to tell you this, that it is my belief, and again, I said thousands of people who spoke about end time, they had things wrong, and I'm not going to be arrogant or proud to say that that can't happen to me. I could be wrong on this. I'm not going to tell you 100% that's the way it is. And if it's not, then, I take responsibility for what I say. I'm not going to blame it on somebody else. I've heard somebody else prophesy like this, and they make these wild predictions. And when they don't happen, say, well, I didn't say that. Somebody else, if I was quoting other people. And they were saying that. And if it's something come true, even vaguely, they'll say, well, you remember I told you because God gave me the gift of interpreting the prophetic scriptures. I doubt there is such a gift. I certainly don't have it. And I don't think there's anybody that do have it. If they did have it, they would have it all right. Nobody would be wrong. And I was reading, before I'm going to go on these reasons and what I was going to tell you about what I believe about what's happening right now. A couple of years back, I bought a book on Kindle, and I think it was a pastor, John Price or something like that. He wrote a book on why America is the great Babylon in the Revelation, or the great harlot. And he was pointing all these reasons. That was one of the theories, I guess. And I had a lot of fun with seeing him where he actually tried to force interpretation, where he talks about that she was killing the prophets of God and all the messages of God, and was trying to force their interpretation on America, and it's just, that doesn't fit. That's like taking one of those pieces of the puzzle. You try to force it in, it doesn't work, then you just cut it a little bit to make it fit in. But that's not how biblical prophecy works. If it's true, it fits in just right. You can find, some exceptions, individual cases where some Christians might be persecuted in America, but that's not what defines this country. This country was always a safe haven for refuge for those who were persecuted. Christians or even other religions. But the interesting thing when I was reading that book, and I paid 99 cents for it, and after that I realized that I overpaid by 99 cents. I wouldn't recommend you to spend 2 pennies on it. But if somebody is willing to, has that book, is giving it to you for free, then I would say, don't waste your time either. And at the end of the book, he does this, what a lot of pastors do, where they make predictions based on no biblical foundation whatsoever. I predict that this is going to happen, this is going to happen. One of the things that he said, I predict that the current pope is going to die in office. First, I'm thinking, where is that in the Bible? I mean, why are you're writing a prophetic book about prophecy, but you're making a prediction like a psychic. But the second thing is, I'm laughing and I'm saying, dude, every pope dies in office. I mean, they are elected for life. John Paul II died, and after that, they elected a second one. I say, what are the chances of that, him getting that wrong? And guess what? Even though he only had this much chance of getting it wrong, he got it wrong. Because that pope resigned, and now we have Pope Francis, and the other one didn't die in office. So even when you think he couldn't get it wrong, he still got it wrong. And that's what happened when we made predictions. But what I'm saying right now, I'm not making these wild things based on something that is just my imagination. I'm looking at the biblical prophecies, and I can tell you how I understand it. And what I'm trying to give you right now is 4 reasons, 3 of them biblical. What I believe that what's happening right now with ISIS or ISIL in Syria and Iraq is the beginning or the rise of the kingdom of the Antichrist. And I believe, although like I said, might be wrong, that this leader of that movement, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, that is actually the one the Bible calls the Antichrist. Well, actually, the Bible doesn't call him Antichrist. The church tradition calls him the Antichrist. I'm not going to go into that, explain to you what that means. He has many names in the Bible. The first thing that a lot of people will need to notice, it's in Daniel in chapter 7, verse 8. Now, in the book of Revelation, talks about the Antichrist or the beast that comes with his 7 heads and 10 horns. But the book of Daniel gives us one small detail which the book of Revelation doesn't give us. Okay? And look at verse 8 in chapter 7. He says, while I was contemplating the horns, behold, another horn, a little one, came up among them, and 3 of the first horns were pulled out by the roots before it. And behold, this horn possessed eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth uttering great boasts. And then in verses 19 through 27, the vision is being interpreted by the angel to Daniel. And it says, when I desired to know the exact meaning of the 4th beast, which was different from all the other, exceedingly great, dreadful, with its teeth of iron, its claws of bronze, and which devoured, crushed, and trampled down the remainder with its feet. And the meaning of the 10 horns that were on his head, and the other horn which came up, and before which 3 of them fell, namely that horn which had eyes and the mouth and uttering great boasts, and which was larger in appearance than its associates. I kept looking, and that horn was waging war with the saints and overpowering them, until the Ancient of Days came, and judgment was passed in favor of the saints of the highest one, and the time arrived when the saints took possession of the kingdom. Thus he said, the 4th beast will be a 4th kingdom on the earth, which will be different from all the other kingdoms. It will devour the whole earth and tread it down and crush it. And as for the 10 horns, out of this kingdom, 10 kings will rise. And another one will arise after them, and he will be different from the previous one, and will subdue 3 kings. And he will speak out against the Most High and wear down the saints of the highest one. And he will intend to make alterations in times and in law, and they will be given into his hand for a time, times, and half a time. So what this passage is saying is that in this 10-nation coalition, there is this one little horn which represents a new nation or a new king, which starts little, but it grows, and before it, 3 other horns are falling down. In other words, a new nation that is beginning, who takes birth, it will take over 3 governments that already exist. And what we see right now in Iraq and Syria, we have I think it looks pretty obvious, 2 of those, Iraq and Syria. And there's going to be, I believe, a 3rd one, which is going to be directly under the control of the Antichrist. Now, the other 7, they are going to come along as a coalition, but he's not going to be ruling directly in those territories. He's only going to rule in these 3 nations. But the other 7 will join him in a coalition. Now, of course, I mean, if you're looking at the situation in the Middle East, you will think, okay, the 3rd one should be Lebanon. But there are some scholars who believe that that's going to be Turkey, and I'm not going to get into that, but based on Ezekiel 38 and 39, where it talks about the Gog of Magog, most scholars right now, they put Magog and all these other countries mentioned there, or not all of them, but some of those, as territories in what's today Turkey. Now, so this is the first thing that I wanted to look at and say that the Bible talks about this rise of the Antichrist, that when he comes, that he is going to take over 3 nations. He's going to start from nothing, grow slowly, and replace 3 nations. The second one I mentioned earlier that the Bible uses this types, where a certain character or a person in the Old Testament represents someone else in the future. And there are 2 such types in the Bible that are referred to the Antichrist. And one is the little horn, also in the book of Daniel, where it talks about Antiochus IV Epiphaneos from the Seleucid Empire. I'm going to explain to you what this is. Daniel talks about this coming Greek kingdom, Alexander the Great, and after he died, he divided his kingdom among his 4 generals. And 2 of these kingdoms, the Seleucid Empire and the Ptolemaic Empire, are the ones that actually lasted the longest, and they grew. They're stronger than the other one. The Seleucid is in what's today Syria, but not just Syria, and it's a lot larger area. And by the way, if you are wondering what's the difference between ISIS and ISIL, because you see the government, our government, and Obama always refers to them as ISIL, but the news talks them on ISIS. The ISIS stands for the Islamic State in Iraq and Syria. The last S in our news media stands for Syria. However, to the Muslims, it stands for Sham or Al-Sham, which is the equivalent in English is the Levant. The Levant is referring to a territory which what is called the Greater Syria, that includes all of Syria, includes southern parts of Turkey, includes Lebanon, includes Cyprus, includes Jordan, Palestine, and Israel. So what these guys are calling themselves, it's the Islamic State. There's not just over those 2 countries, but all these nations that I called, including Israel, and their view or their goal is that they will establish their caliphate headquarters in Jerusalem. Now, if you would have asked me about 6 months ago, I would have told you, and I believe that there's going to be a caliphate, and that whoever's going to be the first caliph and the Islamic caliph, this is going to be the Antichrist. But I will tell you, because of my pre-understandings, that I did not expect him to arise the way it is right now. I thought that he's going to be one who's going to be accepted by both the Islamic world and the West as one who's tried to kind of negotiate peace, and because of that, the West is going to allow the Muslims to have their own caliph, which they've been calling for a while. And just so you know, for those that don't know, a caliph is kind of like what the Pope is to the Catholic Church. A caliph is the spiritual leader of the whole Islamic faith. Although Islam has the 2 branches, the Shiites and the Sunnis, they do not both agree on what that is. But I believe that whoever's going to be the first caliph, this is going to be the Antichrist. But I didn't expect him to come this way by force. That's because of my pre-understanding. And I didn't understand this verse that I just read, or these scriptures that I just read to you. Well, going back to the little horn, Daniel talks about this too, and then a great portion of Daniel talks about the history, what was going to happen with this, the fight between these two, the Seleucid Empire, or the Greek part of the empire, part of the Greek Empire, with the Ptolemaic Empire, which ruled in Egypt and Libya and that area. And one is called the Kingdom of the North, and the other one is called the Kingdom of the South. And Daniel describes a history of about 150 years of fighting between these two dynasties. And the details are so specific, so detailed, that the Bible critics who do not believe in the biblical prophecy, they say, well, that couldn't have been written by Daniel before these things happened. This must have been written after the, the Maccabees, after these things already happened, because I don't think there's any prophecy in the scripture, in the Old Testament, that is as detailed and as specific as the battles between these two dynasties. And then it focuses in on one of them, which is the last one of the Seleucid Empire, which is Antiochus IV. And he speaks about him, how he comes and he desecrates the temple and he kills a lot of Jews. But all of a sudden, the description that goes about him, it jumps to certain things that were not fulfilled, because he is a prototype or a prophetic type of the Antichrist. Now, keep this in mind, that in this type, he is coming from Syria, and he represents the coming Antichrist. The other prototype that we have in the Old Testament that is a symbol of the Antichrist is the King Sennacherib. King Sennacherib, you'll find him in 2 Kings chapters 18 and 19, and 2 Chronicles chapters 32. And it talks about this Assyrian king who's coming to invade Judah during the time of Hezekiah. And while he's still fighting with his army a little bit north of Judah, right there in Lachish, he sends one of his generals, to go to Jerusalem and start, just put fear into them. And he comes outside the wall and he starts saying all kind of blasphemy against God. And he said, how can you trust Hezekiah that your God is going to save you? Look at all these nations. None of their gods saved them. And he said, your God's not going to save you. Don't let yourself be deceived. And Isaiah comes and prophesies to him and tells him not to worry. And then an angel of the Lord comes. And in one night, he kills 180,000 soldiers, Syrian soldiers. And when they woke up in the morning, the generals and they find all these soldiers dead, they just went back. When he went back, he was killed by his own sons while he was worshiping in his own temple. Now, this is the prophetic context, historical context of the prophecies in Isaiah, where it talks about the Assyrian. However, when you read about these prophecies in Isaiah about the Assyrian, there is very clear that he's not talking about just Sennacherib. For example, in Isaiah, he prophesies in chapter 14 that he's going to die in the mountains of Israel, that I will crush you in the land, in the Israel. Well, that didn't happen with Sennacherib. However, that whole story with the angel coming and killing 180,000, it's a prophetic type of the end time, when this army of the Antichrist will also be killed by a supernatural intervention by God, by the appearance of Christ. Just like this 180,000 who were killed by an angel. So it speaks in a prophetic way of the Antichrist. But the point I'm trying to make, that throughout the book of Isaiah and also in Micah chapter 5, you read these prophecies about this coming Assyrian. And we always thought we look for the Antichrist coming from Europe, but every time when it talks about the Antichrist in the biblical prophecies in the Old Testament, not one time there's indication that he comes from anywhere except from north of Israel, somewhere in the area of Assyria. Just so you know, the Assyria is not just Syria. The capital of Assyria, where this Sennacherib ruled, was Nineveh. And Nineveh is the today's city of Mosul, which is in northern Iraq, is where this whole movement, all this movement of ISIS started. In fact, this leader, Abu al-Baghdadi, but that's not his real name. I don't want to get too much into that because there is also meaning in his name about the name that he chose. But it's just like the Pope, when he becomes the Pope, he chooses a name. Their Caliph does the same thing. He was an imam at a mosque right there in Mosul. So he's coming from the capital of Assyria. So when you're looking at these three things, both the little horn or the Antiochus Epiphanes coming from this territory, the Assyrian, which is prophesied constantly, referring to the Antichrist, he refers to him as the Assyrian. And then we look at those prophecies in Daniel where it talks about one nation that takes over three nations. Then things will begin to take shape on how we understand what's happening right now in the Middle East. And I'm going to give you one more thing to think about this. Now, this comes from the Islamic tradition, not from the Bible. If you look on news about this ISIS, can you describe their flag? You know what the flag looks like? First of all, you need to understand it's a black flag. Now, this might not mean much to us, but in the eschatological expectation of the Muslims, this has a very important significance. You see, Hamas has a green flag. Hezbollah has a yellow flag. There are different Muslim states that have other colors, but no one has a black flag because in their eschatological or their belief about the end time, the one who comes with the black flags, or they call it black banners or black standard, is the one which they call Mahdi, which is their end time redeemer. They believe in a Messiah too, and they call him Mahdi, and you probably heard about this when you had your guest speaker. So this guy's choice of the flag as being black, just that one color, okay, it has a very great significance to the Muslims. I mean, it might not mean anything to us, but to them, he's clearly saying that I am the one that you are waiting for, the Mahdi, because of these black banners, the black flags. Now, not all the Muslims agree with that, but you don't have any other terrorist organization who ever used this black flag before this guy. And this is spreading and is growing so fast that I don't see, or I doubt it, how this is going to be stopped by anyone. I know Obama came and the West came out and they are making plans on how to stop this. And I kind of laughed when I saw the plan, that we are going to arm other troops on the ground. We build this Muslim coalition that's going to fight him, and we're just going to give him air support. And the first thing you notice now, some of our greatest allies in the area, like Turkey, they want to have nothing to do with it. Because Turkey says, you know, they know that there's what's happening right there in ISIS is not just in ISIS. This is thing that it's spreading throughout the entire Islamic world. It's becoming more and more radicalized. And even in Turkey, there are so many who agree with these guys. And they are afraid that any kind of help they will give to the United States or anyone else to fight this will entice those radicals from their own country to revolt just like the ones in Syria. And they don't want to do it. I mean, not only they don't want to participate with their own troops, they don't even want to let the Americans have air bases there. And if we don't have that, and maybe we don't know yet what's with the Saudi Arabia, then where are they going to launch all those strikes from? From Israel? I don't think so. Because Israel gets involved into this, then that's just going to inflame everybody up even more. I'm going to give you 3 reasons or things that I learned, lessons that I learned from the Romanian anti-communist revolution, and which applies to this situation. First of all, you have what is called the beach ball effect. Beach ball is like if you go out to take a big beach ball that is inflated and you go and you try to press it down on the water. More that you press it down, more that it's going to try to come up. You know, it's going to be harder and harder. There's that tension. And this is what happened in communism in Eastern Europe, right? So there's this tension between the communist government and the people, and the way you control this tension by hiring the Securitate forces, try to keep them down. But as this tension grew, then they have to hire even more. And more you press, more tension is going to be. And eventually this tension continues to grow until it can no longer be contained. It's going to blow up. Everybody knew that was going to happen. And the only thing they could do is they could try to control when it flares up here and there. Somebody has some kind of a demonstration. They will come and they will quench it real quick before it can spread out. And that happened a few times in Romania until eventually they couldn't do it anymore. And this is what happened right now in the Middle East. There is no military solution for what's happening right there. In fact, there is no solution at all. They have a difference of ideology. They say Bush was the one trying to control it. Obama took the other approach where they said, well, just let her go, you know. But neither one of those solves the problem. And even if you're going to go and try to quench this problem right there, it's going to flare up somewhere else because there's a growing tension. Because these radical Islamic beliefs are going to grow and continue to grow, and it's never going the other way. You cannot negotiate with them. You cannot educate them. You cannot keep them under control because it continues to grow. So that's the first thing I learned from the communist revolution is that there is no way to deal. Once that tension is being built, there's no way to deal with it. And sooner or later, you can try to control it when it flares up here and there, but sooner or later, it's going to blow up. Second thing I learned from the Romanian Revolution is that sometimes armies that are called to control this, they are not reliable. What happened in Romania? They called the army to try to control it, and they switched sides. Why did they switch sides? Because the soldiers who were fighting in this army, they didn't think like the communists did. They were on the side of the revolution. They thought the way they did. And this is the same thing that's going to happen in the Middle East. You might have an army because at the government level you don't agree with this ISIS, but these soldiers, more and more of them, they begin to think like these guys. These are not dedicated soldiers to that cause. And they're fighting an army which is probably the most dedicated fighters that you can think of. Now, not long ago, it was just 15,000. Now, the last report was that they're about 31,500. Just from a day ago, I heard that. And they continue to grow so fast. And these are not just any soldiers. These are soldiers who are willing to strap bombs to themselves, jump in the middle of their enemies, and blow themselves up. Because they are motivated by a religious belief. They are not fighting because they're patriotic. They're not just fighting for their freedom. They're fighting for what? They believe they're fighting for God, for Allah. Now, in the Bible, Jesus talks about our devotion to Him and says, if you don't hate your mother and father, He was talking about our relationship with Him should be above any other relationship. Should be above our country, should be above our families. And unless your devotion to Christ is like that, then you're not worthy to be called His disciple. And we agree with this, but the same thing is true with the Muslims. When they go to fight, the greatest army or the best army soldiers you can have are the ones that you can make them believe they're fighting for God. They fight for free. And they don't fight just to win. They fight to give their lives. And especially with the Muslims, because you see, as Christians, we don't have to
die as martyr and to believe that we are saved. But the Muslims, they say that you cannot have that assurance of salvation. You can be the best Muslim. You are safe if Allah wills. There is no such thing as assurance, with one exception. Muhammad said that if you fight for Allah, the first time you drop the one drop of blood and fight for him, then you and 70 members of your closest family are going to be saved. So these guys are not only willing to fight, they're willing to die. This is why you have these radical Muslims who constantly blow themselves up, because they believe that is the sure way to go to heaven and to get their 72 virgins. I don't know how many virgins they think they're going to be there. And this is the kind of enemies that they're fighting. This is a dedicated enemy. And the third thing that I found from the revolution, the communist revolution, is what happens right after the revolution, Romanian revolution. All these other governments saw what happened in Romania, and they believed and they feared that the same thing will happen with them. And they flip-flop on their political view, and they came out to their people and said, okay, we're on your side. We are giving you democracy. We abandon communism. And all those other East European countries, they abandoned communism in a peaceful way, even those their governments who did this allowed them to have that democracy. They themselves were communist. And this is what I think is going to happen also in the Middle East. Once these guys will get established, you will have plenty of other countries, Muslim countries, where the growth of this ideology happens in their country so much that out of fear that this is not going to happen in their country, what's happening right now to Syria, they are going to pledge their allegiance to this new caliph. And even though they don't recognize him as a caliph right now, they're going to recognize him when he's going to be successful and when he is going to establish himself. And those are things that I learned from the anti-communist revolution, and actually we all learned, especially those that lived in communism, when you saw this, that you can understand that the only one thing that is going to stop this growth of Islamic threat is the second coming of Christ. And if what I said and my interpretation is correct, I say if it's correct, because I acknowledge, and I'm going to do it again, that it's possible I can be wrong. But even if I'm wrong about this, this is going to happen again. But if this is going to be correct, what kind of people should we be, or how should we live? That's what Peter said in his second epistle, where he talks about this end times. He said, if we know these things about the coming, what kind of people are we to be? How should we live in holiness? Now consider the implications of this. If this is true, and of course, like where it talks to the biblical prophecies again, we don't have really a good sense of how long it's going to take for this thing to develop. It could be a year or 2 or 3 or 10, I don't know, before this 10-nation coalition is going to happen. But we know this, that at the moment when he is going to sign this 7 years covenant, it will be 3.5 years before he's going to invade Israel. It's going to be 7 years before the coming of our Lord. Although we don't have anything in the Bible that will give us or try to predict the coming of Jesus, this one thing we do know. Because the Bible is clear that at the end of this 7 years, that's when Jesus is coming. Now, I'm not making any comments about the rapture. That depends on where you are and your belief about this, and I have my own. And, but at least this is how long it's going to take. Now, the question is, how long is going to happen before this beginning of this 7 years? We don't know. But I do believe that what we see right now, happening right there, it has biblical proportions. This is a fulfillment of thousands of years of prophecies, where it talks about the Assyrian. There's one other thing that I actually I didn't mention. I kind of looked into his biography, this al-Baghdadi. And one of the things that I noticed, he was born in a city in Iraq called Samarra. Samarra, it's about 80 miles north of Baghdad on the Tigris River. And I Googled and I looked on the Wikipedia on the Samarra, and that city has also very great significance for the Muslims, specifically for the Shiites. Now, he's not a Shiite, he's a Sunni. But the Shiites believe in these 12 imams, and that the 12th imam is going to be the Mahdi, their savior, right? But this 12th imam, supposedly he came already 1,000 years ago, but they developed this theology, what's called the occultation of the 12th imam, that he went into hiding, and they have these prophecies that Allah hid him. He's alive for 1,000 years among people, but nobody knows who he is, and he's going to come at the end of time. Well, this imam is from Samarra, from where this guy was born. And even though he's Sunni, when he talks about the Gog and Magog and Ezekiel, one of the nations that's going to join them is going to be Persia, which is Iran. But Persia is not Sunni. Persia is predominantly Shiites. And how are they going to align with this guy? And there is a possibility, just because he's born in that city, that they will have this understanding that maybe he's going to be accepted by both sides of the Muslims, the Sunnis and the Shiites. Although right now, he's actually killing Shiites. But Iran is the only nation in there that was all, I mean, not all, completely all, but almost completely Shiite. And more than I think about this and I contemplate about this, and I realize that all our lives we talked about the possibility that Jesus is coming in our lifetime. But I see it now even clearer and clearer. And it has come upon us really like all of a sudden. I never got into these biblical prophecies before, like I said, and I never really preached about it. And I never really studied it so closely. Lately I have, because I believe that what's happening right now is that piece of the puzzle, the picture of the puzzle. It's coming together, and now everything is falling into place. And we start to understand scriptures, and we try to understand prophecies, which before it was not even possible. And if that is the case, and we are this close, what does that mean for us? I guess that's a question that each one of us should ask for himself. And I'm not sure how this is going to affect us directly, because most scholars, they don't believe that this is going to be a universal kingdom in the Antichrist. That means it's not going to be whole global. And I don't have, again, time to go into this. Maybe some other time, you know, I did told you that I'm not going to preach in series anymore. I might have to take this back now, you know, and continue on some of these subjects here. But it does have some implications. And I'm looking at what's happening right now in our country, what's happening with Ukraine also, with the Russia and the tensions that's happening right there. And the only way this thing could have happened and developed so fast in the Middle East is for God to raise to presidency in our country a toothless president. This would not have been possible probably against, you know, with some of other presidents we had, or at least would have been delayed. But, you know, this is what was going to take. This is what it was going to take for us to have a president that will just say, no, I don't want to do anything. And he talks tough right now. In that sense, he's like the false prophet I'm not saying he's the false prophet in the book of Revelation, but it talks about that he's a lamb who talks like a lion. And this guy, he talks like a lion, but he acts like a lamb. So that's the only parallel that I'll make out there, but I'm not saying that that's him because I don't believe that's him. But this is exactly what it was going to take for these things to take place. And I truly believe that God is in charge of all this. And what's happening there, it might look for some to be scary. For me, it's hope. You know, Jesus said, when you start seeing these things happening, then lift up your head because your redemption is near. And I was saying that the scriptures or the prophecies are not so predict the future, but you know what they are given for? They are given to strengthen our faith when those things happen. When we are going to go, or if we are going to be affected by this, even if not, or at least those who are in the midst of all this, these are the prophecies and the scriptures that are going to give them the strength to persevere in their faith. Imagine what it would have been like for us as Christians if we had no biblical prophecy at all about the end time. Nothing. Not even this frame that I was talking about. We would not have known anything. And all this would have been just new stuff, unexpected stuff. How would we respond to this? And well, for Christians who will go in the midst, will probably come to a point of despair where they will not have their faith they could stand those kind of persecution. But because of the scriptures, because the prophecies were given for that purpose, to strengthen the believers in the times when these times are coming. This is why we can be strong, or we can resist these things. I'm going to stop right here because I went way too long. I think everybody's looking at the clock. So maybe I'll continue some other time. Let me just pray. Lord Father, we thank you for your word. We thank you for your promises. We thank you for your care, and we know that even when everything is dark, even when it might look like Satan has the upper hand, we have the promise in the Bible that above all these things, from your heaven, you are completely sovereign over everything, and nothing is taking you by surprise. And we thank you because you gave us the possibility to look into the last chapter of all these things. And that's where our hope lies. Our hope lies in the coming of our salvation, our King, fulfillment of our hope. I pray, Lord, that you will strengthen our hearts and our minds and give us the wisdom to deal with these times in such a way that you will manifest yourself through us in these dark times, that we can shine. In Jesus' name, amen.